The wind howled through the dusty streets of Willow Creek as Nora Ellis hurried past the general store, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. The whispers followed her, cruel and cutting as the spring of 1876 brought not only new life to the Wyoming territory but fresh contempt for the young woman whose lilting Irish accent marked her as different. "There she goes, that strange talking gal," someone muttered as she passed. "Can't even speak proper English." Nora clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, eyes fixed on the dirt path ahead. At 22, she'd survived far worse than petty ridicule, having crossed an ocean after the potato famine claimed her parents. But the isolation in this frontier town where she'd sought refuge was becoming unbearable. The town meeting hall's doors stood open, voices spilling out into the late afternoon. Nora hadn't intended to linger, but the words that reached her ears rooted her to the spot. "We've decided then," announced Mayor Thornton, his booming voice carrying. "This town was founded on good American values. We can't have foreign influences corrupting our children. Miss Ellis must leave Willow Creek by week's end." Gasps and murmurs of agreement filled the air. Nora's blood turned to ice in her veins. "Banished. For the way she spoke, her accent is unnatural," continued Mrs. Prescott, the schoolmaster's wife. "The children are starting to mimic her. It's unseemly. And who knows what strange ideas she's bringing from that backward country," added another voice. "Ireland breeds nothing but trouble and rebels." Nora stepped back, trembling. 3 years she'd spent in Willow Creek, working as a seamstress, keeping to herself, sending letters to her brother in Boston. 3 years of quiet loneliness, and now this. She turned and fled, tears blurring her vision as she ran down the main street, past curious onlookers, past the saloon where raucous laughter mocked her despair. She didn't stop until she reached the small room she rented above the laundry, collapsing onto her narrow bed. Where would she go? What would she do? The nearest town was 40 miles away, and the stagecoach wouldn't come for another fortnight. Morning came with no answers, only the harsh reality that she had 5 days to pack her meager belongings and leave the only home she'd known in America. Nora moved mechanically through her tasks at the seamstress shop, ignoring the cold shoulders and whispered comments. "Miss Ellis." Sheriff Cooper approached her as she locked up the shop that evening. "I heard about the town's decision. I don't agree with it, but I can't go against the mayor. I can arrange for you to join a wagon heading east on Thursday." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, her musical accent rolling the R in a way that had apparently sealed her fate. "But I will find my own way." The next morning, Nora counted her savings barely enough for passage to the next town, let alone a new start. With trembling hands, she pinned a notice to the board outside the general store. "Seamstress services will travel. Inquire within." It was a desperate gamble, but perhaps someone needed skilled hands for their journey. She could work her way to another settlement, somewhere more accepting. By midday, the bell above the shop door jingled, and Nora looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sunlight. The man who entered wore dusty clothes and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. His boots were worn from countless miles, and a gun belt hung at his hip, a cowboy, by all appearances. "Afternoon," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I saw your notice." "Good afternoon, sir," Nora replied, automatically wincing at her own voice, now painfully conscious of the lilt that had condemned her. The stranger's expression changed, not to disgust or mockery, but to something akin to wonder. "You're the one they're making leave." "Because of how you talk," Nora nodded, steeling herself for another barb. "I am. I'm heading to Summit Ridge," he said instead. "Got a small cattle operation there. Could use someone who knows their way around a needle for the journey and beyond. Ranch hands are always tearing something." Hope flickered in Nora's chest. "You're offering me work, if you'll take it," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Zane Owens. My ranch is 3 days' ride from here." Nora hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "Nora Ellis, I accept Mr. Owens." "Call me Zane," he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "We leave at dawn." As Nora packed her few possessions that night, a strange mix of fear and excitement churned in her stomach. She would be traveling alone with a man she'd just met, heading into unknown territory. But something about Zane Owens' straightforward manner, and the way he'd seemed untroubled by her accent, gave her courage. Dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold as Nora met Zane at the edge of town. He had 2 horses, a sturdy chestnut gelding for himself and a gentle dappled mare for her. "I assumed you could ride," he said, helping her secure her bundle to the saddle. "I can," she replied. In truth, she hadn't been on a horse in years, not since leaving Ireland, but she wouldn't admit that now. They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, Willow Creek shrinking behind them. Nora felt eyes on her back as they departed, but she didn't turn around. There was nothing left for her there. "So," Zane said after they'd covered several miles, "what brought you to Wyoming territory in the first place?" Nora considered how much to share. "The famine in Ireland took my parents. My brother and I came to America seeking a better life. He found work in Boston, and I followed a friend's suggestion to head west where seamstresses were scarce." "And they banished you because of your accent," Zane shook his head. "Small minds in small towns. You don't mind it then, the way I speak?" Nora couldn't help asking. Zane looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. "Mind it? Miss Ellis, your voice is like nothing I've ever heard. It's—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It's like music, like heaven to these trail-worn ears." Heat rose to Nora's cheeks. No one had ever complimented her voice before. "Besides," he continued, "out here, folks come from all over. German, Italian, Chinese, everyone's looking for a fresh start. Summit Ridge isn't like Willow Creek. People there care more about what you can do than where you're from." As they made camp that first night, Nora watched Zane move with easy efficiency, building a fire, preparing a simple meal of beans and bacon. He wasn't much for words, but when he did speak, he listened to her responses with genuine interest. "How did you come to ranching?" she asked as they sat by the fire. "Fought in the war," he said, his expression momentarily shadowed. "Afterward, couldn't stomach going back east. Worked as a trail hand, saved up, bought my spread 5 years ago. It's not much yet, but it's mine." "You fought for the Union," Nora ventured. "Yes, madam, 8th Illinois Cavalry." He stirred the fire. "Lost my brother at Antietam." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "War leaves terrible wounds." Zane looked up, studying her face in the firelight. "That it does. Some you can see, some you can't." The next day brought rolling hills and a wider expanse of sky than Nora had ever seen. Her body ached from riding, but she didn't complain. This journey represented freedom, a new beginning. "There's a creek up ahead," Zane said around midday. "Good place to rest the horses." The creek burbled merrily over smooth stones, its banks lined with cottonwoods offering blessed shade. Nora slid from her saddle with a barely suppressed groan. "Sore?" Zane asked, a knowing glint in his eyes. "A bit," she admitted. "It'll pass. Your body will remember." As they watered the horses, a shot rang out, echoing across the open terrain. Zane's hand flew to his revolver, his body tensing. "Get down," he ordered, pulling Nora behind a fallen log. 3 riders appeared on the ridge above the creek, their faces obscured by bandanas. Zane Owens. One called. "Thought that was your trail we picked up." "Farley," Zane muttered, his voice hard. "Road agents. They've been causing trouble between here and Summit Ridge. Hand over your valuables and the lady and we'll let you live," Farley shouted, Nora's heart hammered in her chest. "What do we do?" she whispered. "When I say run, get to the horses," Zane instructed, checking his revolver. "I'll cover you." "I won't leave you," she protested. Zane's eyes met hers, fierce and determined. "I'm not asking. These men are killers." Before she could argue further, Zane stood and fired 2 rapid shots toward the ridge. The bandits scattered, returning fire wildly. "Run!" Zane shouted, and Nora sprinted for the horses, her skirts hitched up around her knees. She reached her mare, fumbling with the reins. A bullet splintered the tree beside her and she swallowed a scream. Zane appeared at her side, vaulting into his saddle. "Ride," he commanded, and they galloped away from the creek, the bandits in pursuit. They rode hard, pushing the horses to their limits. Zane led them into increasingly rugged terrain, finally losing their pursuers in a maze of rocky outcroppings as dusk fell. They made a cold camp that night, not daring to light a fire. Huddled under a shared blanket, Nora couldn't stop shaking. "You did well back there," Zane said quietly. Most people would have panicked. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear, it's about what you do despite it." In the darkness, his hand found hers, warm and reassuring. "Try to sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow." Nora didn't think she'd be able to sleep, but eventually exhaustion claimed her. She awoke to find herself nestled against Zane's chest, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in watercolor strokes of lavender and gold. She remained still, listening to the steady beat of his heart, aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. In the space of 2 days, this taciturn cowboy had become her protector, her lifeline in a hostile world. When Zane stirred, she quickly sat up, embarrassed. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. If he was uncomfortable with how they'd spent the night, he didn't show it. They resumed their journey as the sun climbed higher, Zane leading them through a landscape that grew increasingly beautiful, rolling prairies giving way to pine-covered foothills. "We're making good time," he said around midday. "Should reach Summit Ridge by tomorrow evening." Nora felt a strange reluctance at the thought. Once they reached town, whatever this was between them would likely end. She would become his employee, nothing more. That evening they camped beside a small pond, mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. Zane caught fish for their dinner and they enjoyed their first hot meal since fleeing the bandits. "Tell me about Ireland," Zane said as they sat by the fire. "What do you miss most?" Nora closed her eyes, memories washing over her. "The green," she said. "Everything is so green there, like God spilled his favorite color across the land. And the music. There was always music, fiddles and tin whistles and songs old as the hills." "Will you sing something?" Zane asked. "A song from home," Nora hesitated. "I haven't sung in years." "Please," he said. "I'd like to hear it." So she sang, her voice tremulous at first, then growing stronger, an old ballad of love and loss, of a maiden waiting for her sailor to return from the sea. The melody drifted up toward the star-strewn sky, carrying with it all the longing and hope she'd buried deep within her heart. When she finished, silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "That was beautiful," Zane said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Like I said, your voice is heaven." "Thank you," Nora whispered, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. "Nora," he began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with his words. "I know we've only known each other a few days, but I feel like I've been waiting to hear your voice my whole life." Her heart fluttered in her chest. "Zane." He moved closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek. "May I?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. She nodded, unable to speak, and his lips met hers in a kiss that started soft and tentative, then deepened as she responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and Nora felt as though she'd finally found home after years of wandering. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan this," he confessed, "but I can't say I'm sorry it happened." "Neither am I," Nora replied, her Irish lilt making the simple words sound like poetry. They reached Summit Ridge the following evening, the small town nestled in a valley with snow-capped peaks rising behind it. It was larger than Willow Creek, with a proper main street lined with businesses and a church spire rising above the rooftops. "My ranch is about 3 miles outside town," Zane explained as they rode down the main street. "But we should stop at the general store first, get you whatever you need." People greeted Zane warmly as they passed, curiosity in their eyes as they noted Nora by his side. She tensed, waiting for the familiar looks of disdain when she spoke. "Zane Owens." About time you showed your face in town, called a robust woman from the porch of a boarding house. And who's this lovely lady, Mrs. Prescott? This is Miss Nora Ellis, Zane said, dismounting and helping Nora down. She'll be staying at my ranch, helping with the household. Welcome to Summit Ridge, dear, Mrs. Prescott said warmly. Any friend of Zane's is a friend of ours. Thank you, Nora replied, her accent clear in those two simple words. But instead of ridicule, she saw only friendly interest in the older woman's eyes. Irish, are you? My Henry's mother came from Cork. Lovely lilt you have. Relief washed over Nora. Perhaps Zane had been right about Summit Ridge after all. The general store was run by a Chinese family who spoke with their own distinctive accent, further confirming that this town was different from Willow Creek. As Nora selected fabric and necessities, the proprietor's wife chatted amiably with her. You sew? She asked, noting Nora's expert assessment of the fabrics. I was a seamstress in Willow Creek, Nora explained. We need good seamstress here, the woman said excitedly. Many people, few with your skills. You make dresses, you bring to me, I sell, we share profit. Before Nora could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and the thunder of hooves filled the air. Farley's gang, someone yelled. They're robbing the bank, Zane's expression hardened. Stay here, he told Nora, drawing his revolver and moving toward the door. Zane, don't, she pleaded, grabbing his arm. They'll kill you. These people are my friends, Nora. I can't hide while they're in danger. She knew she couldn't stop him. Be careful, she whispered, and he squeezed her hand before stepping outside. Through the window, Nora watched as Zane joined several other men taking positions around the bank. Gunfire erupted, the sharp reports making her flinch. One of the bandits, Farley himself, spotted Zane and took aim. Without thinking, Nora rushed from the store, snatching up a broom as she went. With all her strength, she swung it at Farley's horse as it passed, startling the animal into rearing. Farley's shot went wild and he struggled to control his mount. That moment of distraction was all Zane needed. He fired, hitting Farley in the shoulder. The outlaw tumbled from his horse and the sheriff and his deputies quickly subdued him. As the dust settled, Zane strode toward Nora, his expression a mix of anger and admiration. What were you thinking? He demanded, holstering his weapon. You could have been killed. He was going to shoot you, she replied, trembling now that the danger had passed. I couldn't just watch. Zane's face softened and he pulled her into a fierce embrace, heedless of the onlookers. Brave and foolish woman, he murmured into her hair. Don't ever scare me like that again. The sheriff approached, tipping his hat to Nora. Madam, that was quite something. You're new in town. This is Nora Ellis, Zane said, keeping an arm around her waist. She'll be staying at my ranch. Pleased to meet you, Miss Ellis, the sheriff said. Thanks for your help today. Farley's been terrorizing these parts for months. Word of Nora's bravery spread quickly through Summit Ridge. By the time they reached Zane's ranch, amidst spread with a sturdy cabin, barn, and corral housing about 30 head of cattle, she had been invited to 3 social gatherings and the church picnic. See, Zane said as they dismounted. Told you Summit Ridge was different. The cabin was simple but well built, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. It was plain but clean, waiting for a woman's touch to make it truly a home. It's not much, Zane said, suddenly self-conscious. But the land is good, and I'm adding more cattle each year. It's wonderful, Nora assured him, already envisioning curtains for the windows and a garden out front. That night, after a simple supper, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The mountains loomed dark against the night sky, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and sage. Nora, Zane said, taking her hand. I know this is fast, maybe too fast, but when you sang last night I knew. Knew what? She asked, her heart quickening. That I want to hear that voice every day for the rest of my life. He turned to face her fully. I'm not a poetic man, I can't offer fancy words or grand gestures, but I can offer you this ranch, my protection, and my heart. Nora's eyes filled with tears. Are you proposing, Zane Owens? I reckon I am, he said with a gentle smile. Will you marry me, Nora Ellis? Make this place a home. Let me wake up to your voice every morning. She thought of the journey that had brought her here from Ireland to Boston, to Willow Creek, and now to this ranch with this man who thought her accent was heaven rather than a flaw. Yes, she said, her lilting voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. He kissed her then, a promise sealed under the vast Wyoming sky. They were married 3 weeks later in the Summit Ridge Church, with seemingly the entire town in attendance. Nora wore a dress she'd made herself, with lace collar and cuffs that reminded her of her mother's wedding gown. Zane, cleaned up and nervous in a new suit, waited for her at the altar, his face lighting up as she walked toward him. When she spoke her vows, her Irish accent filled the church like music, and Zane's eyes shone with pride and love. The years that followed weren't always easy. Ranching was hard work, with drought, harsh winters, and fluctuating cattle prices all taking their toll. But the ranch prospered under their joint care. Nora's seamstress business flourished as well, her reputation spreading throughout the region. Their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Nora's mother, arrived a year after their marriage. A son, Thomas, followed 2 years later. Both children grew up speaking with a hint of their mother's lilt, much to Zane's delight. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zane presented Nora with a surprise, a tin whistle he'd ordered from back east. "So you can teach our children the music of your homeland," he explained. That night, as the children slept, Nora played the songs of Ireland, and Zane listened with the same wonder he'd shown the first time he heard her voice in the seamstress shop in Willow Creek. "I never thanked them, you know," Zane said as they sat by the fire. "Thanked who?" Nora asked, setting aside the whistle. "The folks in Willow Creek who banished you?" He took her hand, tracing the calluses that years of ranching and sowing had left there. "Their cruelty led you to me. Their small-mindedness gave me the greatest gift of my life." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder. "Everything happens for a reason, I suppose." 10 years after leaving Willow Creek, Nora received a letter from her old friend at the laundry. The town was changing, she wrote. New people had moved in, bringing different cultures and languages. The current mayor was extending an invitation for Nora to return and teach sewing at the new school. Nora penned a polite refusal. She had found her home in Summit Ridge with Zane and their children, now numbering 4 with the addition of twins Lily and James. On their 20th anniversary, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, which had grown considerably over the years. Friends from town mingled with neighboring ranchers and Nora's brother, who had finally moved west to join them. As twilight fell, Zane pulled Nora away from the gathering, leading her to their special spot overlooking the valley. 20 years, he marveled, his once dark hair now streaked with silver. "It seems like yesterday I heard your voice for the first time." "And still you haven't tired of it," she teased, her own accent softened somewhat by years in Wyoming but still distinctly Irish. "Never," he kissed her hand. "Your voice is still my heaven, Nora Owens, always has been, always will be." As they rejoined the celebration, their eldest daughter began to sing an Irish ballad Nora had taught her, her voice rising pure and clear in the evening air. Zane wrapped his arm around his wife's waist, and they listened together to the music that bridged 2 worlds, a testament to the love that had flourished where once there had been only rejection. In Summit Ridge, Nora found not just acceptance but celebration of the very thing that had marked her for exile elsewhere. And in Zane, she found a man who heard music where others heard only difference, a man who had turned her banishment into the greatest blessing of her life. Their story became legend in those parts. The Irish seamstress banished for her accent, and the cowboy who thought her voice was heaven. Long after they were gone, their descendants would tell it, some with a hint of an Irish lilt that never quite faded from the Owens family line, a living reminder that love speaks in many accents. But its message is always understood by those with hearts open enough to listen.